We're ready to get started with our second session of the day. I forgot the name of the session. Oh my gosh, I just had it. It's here. Oh, the ancient world today. Wow, that's so easy. Okay, with our second session of the day, the ancient world today. And we will begin with Alison Manley. Alison Manley is from Minnesota in the United States. She has a bachelor's degree in elementary education from the College of St. Benedict in Minnesota and a master's in archaeology from the University of Cambridge. Her broad resume includes roles from classroom teacher to financial analyst. She currently works for a global agriculture organization and hopes to continue finding ways to research and share stories from the ancient civilizations of Mesopotamia. Today, she will give a talk entitled Lapis Lazuli Cylinder Seals of Ur, 3rd Millennium BC Burial Trends. So go ahead now.
Thanks so much, Christian. All right, I'll go ahead and get my screen shared here. All right, so my paper addresses Lapis Lazuli cylinder seals from the 3rd millennium BC burials from the city of Ur and utilizes data that I gathered from my MPhil dissertation. The overarching question of this paper is, given that Lapis Lazuli cylinder seals can be interpreted as a symbol of elite social status, what can we infer about other materials and objects buried with individuals interred with Lapis Lazuli cylinder seals? So to answer this, I examined burial trends from the Royal Cemetery of Ur with and without Lapis Lazuli cylinder seals. Then I defined potential correlations between burials with these cylinder seals and other objects. So first, I'll attempt to quickly provide the necessary background information. Beginning with our setting. Heavy occupational presence at Ur ebbs and flows throughout history, but permanent settlements are dated as early as 6000 BC. As urbanization spread during the Uruk expansion of the late 4th millennium, Ur was one of several city-states that emerged with agricultural and herding strategies, specialized manufacturing of basic and luxury items, local and long-distance trade relations, and political and social hierarchies. By the end of the early dynastic period, there were 20 to 30 city-states, each considered its own politically distinct entity. During this time, the city of Ur began to flourish. The early dynastic graves of the 3rd millennium BC provide evidence of stratified social structure via massive influx of luxury materials, including lapis lazuli. Ur is home to at least 2,000 individual graves, the lushest of which include Willie's famed 16 royal tombs. The rise of Akkadian powers brought significant cultural change as Akkadian began to replace Sumerian as the language on written documents. Roughly 200 years later, the Akkadian collapse was followed by the short reign of the Ur III dynasty around 2100 BC, and this dynasty fell with the invasion of the Elamites and the rise of Amorite powers in the cities of Isin and Larsa near the end of the 3rd millennium. The presence of cylinder seals begins to decline after this. The Isin-Larsa period ends with the rise of Babylonia and Hammurabi's defeat of Rimsin of Larsa, and the Old Babylonian Empire fell in 1595 BC, and Ur transitioned into the Kassite period. After the decline of the Kassites, Ur remained relatively quiet, according to the archaeological record, until the Neo-Babylonian rule in the mid-6th century BC. Unfortunately, the city had its fate sealed with the water which originally gave it life. The drying of the riverbed led to the stoppage of waterborne traffic, the ruin of the whole elaborate system of irrigation, and the end of agriculture. The Euphrates was essential to Ur's trade relations and facilitated the growth of craft specialization and creation of fine wares using materials that traveled from afar. These items included jewelry, vessels, and cylinder seals. Cylinder seals of the ancient Near East have been objects of fascination for audiences ranging from modern students of the Mesopotamian archaeology to tourists visiting the Middle East in the early 1900s. Varied intricate carvings and luminous materials enhance their aesthetic appeal. Developed around 3500 BC, cylinder seals were used in Mesopotamia through the 5th century BC. They are primarily known for legalizing contracts and other documents, but there's evidence they were also used to seal vessels, baskets, boxes, and storage rooms. As writing developed and became more complex, so too did cylinder seals. The use, material, and iconography of these objects evolved throughout their 3,000-year existence. There are some clear iconographical trends that can be used to help date cylinder seals. Unfortunately, there is no division of time consistently applicable to all Mesopotamian seals. Cologne in 1987 notes absolute dates are likely to be inaccurate and to fluctuate according to the fashion of the day. So thus, while temporal categories as shown here and thematic categories to be defined shortly have been assigned to the study for methodological purposes, they are not to be interpreted as absolute or applicable outside of southern Mesopotamia and should even be cautiously applied outside of the city of Ur. Over 1,400 cylinder seals have been found in the archaeological remains of Ur and the surrounding area. Only completed or finished seals were included in the study, and I excluded seals with unidentifiable iconography and those without a confirmed find spot. Of those remaining, 297, which are shown here in gray, could still not be confidently dated. So general trends are established using 1,038 cylinder seals confidently assigned temporal, material, and iconographical categories. These trends provide a baseline evolution of iconography and materials of cylinder seals used in Ur. The pre-dynastic category encompasses the early civilizations in southern Mesopotamia through the first early dynastic period around 2800 BC. There are very few cylinder seals from this early period in Ur. Shown here are the typical designs, animal patterns, daily life scenes, and geometric patterns. And the most prominent materials are carbonates, steatite, shell, and marble. With political changes during the early dynastic, it's possible there was need for more individualized cylinder seals. The major iconographical trends that arose include contest and banquet scenes, as shown here. And contest scenes are defined as depicting two or more pairs of combatants, which frequently included heroes and hunters, fighting bulls and lions. And they're usually shown standing on their hind legs. Banquet or symposium scenes show individuals seated and drinking through tubes from cups or eating at tables. The use of shell material increased in popularity, also seen as the massive increase in lapis lazuli. Only 2 seals in the pre-dynastic period were of lapis, so this represents a major shift in material choice or availability. The Akkadian reign shifts to a possible glorification of the gods in seal design. Contest scenes maintained dominance on nearly half of Akkadian seals, and presentation scenes became more popular. Those are identified as introductions to gods, goddesses, or deified royals, where one individual typically leads another and sometimes presents an offering. Steatite became the most popular material of the Akkadian period, followed by lapis lazuli, which still represents 22%. And after those two materials, there's generally more diversity, including carbonates, marbles, and fine quartzes. During the Ur III period, ritual worship, contests, and presentation scenes were the primary depictions. Worship scenes, used minimally prior to the Ur III period, are those with individuals standing and praising a god, goddess, or religious symbol. The vast majority of seals are made with varieties of steatite, though lapis lazuli still represents 11%. The archaeological record from the Isin Larsa and Old Babylonian periods shows a decrease of cylinder seals. This time period produced less than 150 reported cylinder seals, even though it encompassed 4 centuries. By this time, the cylinder seals that do exist fully shifted focus to prioritize the seal owner, as evidenced by seals showing text only. Though presentation and worship scenes are most popular, there was generally more variety in iconography during this time. Steatite still constitutes the largest percentage of material, but increased variety can be seen here as well. However, lapis has dropped to only 4%. Less than 50 cylinder seals were found from the Kassite rule. Kassite excavations focused heavily on sacred structures and private houses, and all of the graves that were found were located beneath house floors. The iconography reflects ancient Mesopotamian tradition and imagery, but often supplements it with long prayers. Kassites in Ur began using glass-like materials for cylinder seals. Glass could imitate the look of precious materials like lapis lazuli and jadeite. The Neo-Babylonian era features a more balanced variety in iconographical themes. Mythological, animal, hunting, warfare, contest, and worship scenes share the bulk of depictions. Glass-type materials remained popular, along with chalcedonies and other types of quartz. Lapis lazuli was scarce, which is surprising since the growing Babylonian Empire should have had access to this limited resource. After the Neo-Babylonian period, stamp seals gained popularity, especially during the Neo-Assyrian Empire, slowly ending the cylinder seals' employment. Overall, contest scenes, presentation, and worship themes are the most popular iconography from Ur. Steatite is by far the most popular material, followed by shell, lapis lazuli, and carbonates. Saxe-Coulon and Lease from 1993 explain changes in cylinder seal material as determined by availability rather than choice. It is possible lapis lazuli became increasingly difficult for those in Ur to obtain after the early dynastic period, but selection of material was also likely influenced by physical properties. As Benzo 2015 states, the natural inherent properties of certain materials have the intrinsic potential to give a perception of inherent sacredness, holiness, or divinity to the objects made of such materials in their finished form. Using objects for protective purposes can be traced as far back to the Stone Age amulets, and cylinder seals were no stranger to this amuletic expression, and the stones used to create them had influence on their perceived power. Many have investigated the symbolism of imagery on cylinder seals, but a seal's material is arguably an equally important discussion. For example, William RATHJE examined iconography of early dynastic 3 cylinder seals from Ur's royal cemetery and found female attendants often owned lapis lazuli seals depicting banquets. He interpreted this as representative of leading ladies or their servants. Male attendants in the royal tombs alternatively often owned shell seals depicting contest scenes and were surrounded by weaponry, leading him to infer that they were men capable of serving arms. He placed a very heavy priority on iconography while considering material secondarily or perhaps even coincidental. Franck in 1977 laments that the attempt to formulate relationships between the owners of cylinder seals and the scenes depicted on them has proved to be one of the most unrewarding aspects of the study of cylinder seals. If apparent correlations are found on one seal, they are often contrasted by other examples. It may prove useful to examine iconography as a secondary element to material. So perhaps it was the material that was the primary source of amuletic, protective, or identity-defining power. Lapis lazuli, with its aesthetic appeal and divine association, is an ideal starting point for investigating this theory. With little archaeological evidence, most researchers agree the Badakhshan region of modern Afghanistan is the main source of lapis lazuli. The credit for this argument belongs to Georgina Herman, who stated, of the dozen or so confirmed sites at which it is found around the world, only 3 are within the geographical range of Mesopotamia. And the Badakhshan mines have been generally accepted as the principal source, or indeed as the unique source, of lapis lazuli for the ancient Near East. Lapis lazuli is an opaque semi-precious stone consisting mainly of a blue mineral, lazurite, with streaks of gold pyrite and white calcite. It can range in color from deep violet blue through light blue or even green shades like turquoise. Generally, stones with a higher content of blueness hold the highest value. However, we must remember that color is a cultural construct and is not limited to hue. Simply identifying lapis as blue can be problematic because features such as softness, shininess, darkness, or wetness may have held meaning in identifying appearance. Winter from 1999 suggests that luster may have been a defining characteristic of lapis lazuli. Akkadian terminology differentiating lapis lazuli is highly developed. There are terms for of lapis, with lapis, like lapis, lapis lazuli sky, and even lapis lazuli beard. In the second millennium, correlating with the rise in popularity of glass material, Akkadian language began to differentiate between lapis from the mountain and lapis from the kiln. Both the material properties, the color, hardness, sheen, and the ascribed properties, the amulet, protective, or associative dimensions, defined lapis lazuli. The amuletic and protective properties of lapis lazuli can be gleaned from its representation and description in various texts. In the divine world, lapis was used by Inanna to descend into the netherworld. It is identified as the beard of the moon god of Ur in religious poems. In the poem of Ninurta's exploits, the god passes judgment on 19 groups of stones, glorifying lapis lazuli, among other stones, stating it will be worshipped by all since it supported him with strength. Additionally, lapis lazuli is mentioned in the Assyrian dream book, where lapis lazuli cylinder seals are directly associated with the gods. For humans, lapis lazuli was propitious and safeguarded the wearer from evil. Magical texts suggest the stone possessed properties related to gender and fertility. So there's little question that lapis lazuli was highly valued throughout the historical sequence in ancient Mesopotamia for both humans and gods alike. It was a favored material for cylinder seals in Ur from the early dynastic to the Ur III period. There are 2,000 some well-recorded graves at the Royal Cemetery, and according to Herman, 300 graves contained at least one object made with lapis lazuli. I have found 178 lapis lazuli cylinder seals from Ur and the surrounding area as charted here. It is often assumed banquet scene iconography and lapis lazuli material go hand in hand. Of the 1,335 seals from Ur in this study, 49 depict at least one banquet scene. Of those 49 banquet scene seals, 33 or 67% occur on lapis. So clearly lapis was a favored material for the banquet scene. But because patterns can change over time, we can also examine the correlation temporally. Most banquet scenes are from the early dynastic, during which roughly 1/3 of seals were made of lapis. Logically, one would think that then 1/3 of banquet scenes would be on lapis, but the correlation rate is actually nearly 71%, confirming a significant relationship between the material and iconography. When looking for other iconography patterns, the obvious majority of lapis lazuli cylinder seals in Ur show contest scenes. Contest scenes were generally popular in Ur, but they primarily occur on steatite and shell, while only 17% are on lapis. Other popular iconography on lapis lazuli include the already noted banquet scenes and also worship and geometric scenes. Worship scenes are actually less popular on Lapis than they are on seals overall at UR, so they will not be discussed further. We will instead take a closer look at the correlation with contest and geometric scenes. Data shows changing correlations between contest scenes and Lapis, suggesting attitudes regarding the use of material for contest scenes may have changed. The Akkadian era brought an increased presence of gods to cylinder seal styles, so perhaps this change in material choice reflects the overarching societal shift and divine association with Lapis Lazuli. Interestingly, several contest scenes, much like banquet scenes, are shown on double registers, either depicted on both registers or on one register and paired with an animal motif. There are 14 of these seals in the early dynastic and Akkadian periods, and of these 14, 10 are on Lapis Lazuli. This suggests perhaps there is a correlation between multiple registers and Lapis. Though only 6% of UR cylinder seals have geometric carvings, they too show a significant correlation with their depiction on Lapis Lazuli. And the remaining iconographical categories show no significant discrepancy or show a decrease in use, like the worship scenes, when comparing total seals to Lapis Lazuli. To summarize thus far, the use of Lapis Lazuli materials shows a higher correlation than expected with banquet scenes, geometric patterns, and seals depicting multiple registers. Contest scenes, while the most popular on Lapis Lazuli, seem to have a changing relationship over time. To dive deeper, I investigated if iconography or material would seem more important in determining other grave goods. In short, helping to understand an individual's identity based on grave goods. Out of 178 Lapis Lazuli cylinder seals in UR, 160 were from the Royal Cemetery area, which Woolley labels as PG or PJ. These seals are primarily from the early dynastic, Akkadian, or III periods, aligning with known temporal use of this cemetery. Thus, the remainder of this study focuses on well-recorded graves from the Royal Cemetery. Well-recorded includes graves with noted burial types and or other grave goods, eliminating 28 seals found loose in the soil. These parameters provide 343 graves, with 117 of them containing 132 unique Lapis Lazuli cylinder seals. And here, just for transparency, I've listed the parameters of what was included in the grave good counts that you'll see on the following slides. Since it has been generally confirmed banquet and Lapis cylinder seals have a high correlation, I separated these two characteristics to find a baseline comparison between material and iconography. The dark color you see here on the bars is the presence of the characteristic and the light is the absence. So both banquet, iconography, and Lapis material show seal owners are more likely to be buried with gold, silver, beads, and stone vessels. Owners of Lapis Lazuli cylinder seals, unlike owners of banquet seals, are more likely to be buried with multiple cylinder seals and copper vessels. To show this isn't an anomaly, I compared contest iconography, the scene most commonly shown on Lapis. I also compared data on burials with multiple registers and geometric patterns, as those were the two iconographies that showed an increased correlation with Lapis Lazuli material. So on the next two charts, I'd really like to draw your attention to the other seals and the copper vessels data. Burials containing Lapis Lazuli cylinder seals show consistent gravegood patterns. Graves containing cylinder seals made of Lapis Lazuli with contest scenes show increased correlations with gold, silver, beads, and stone vessels, as is seen in the general Lapis Lazuli and banquet cylinder seal burials. But more importantly, the burials with Lapis Lazuli contest cylinder seals show a significantly higher presence of more than one seal in a burial and the inclusion of copper vessels, meaning the type of iconography does not impact the inclusion of other seals or copper vessels. Graves containing seals made of Lapis Lazuli with multiple registers are shown here. For a third time, the pattern emerges that graves with Lapis seals containing multiple registers show a higher correlation rate with multiple seals and copper vessels than their non-Lapis counterparts. For cylinder seals with geometric iconography, the data differs just a bit. So for example, there's a very small association with gold grave goods, and unlike other burials, there's no significant difference in the presence of silver or beads compared to the average graves. And the other items show a slight but rather insignificant difference. However, graves with Lapis Lazuli geometric seals are again more likely to have multiple seals and copper vessels. The pattern is consistent across the board. Graves with Lapis Lazuli cylinder seals showing banquet scenes, contest scenes, multiple registers, and geometric patterns are all more likely than graves with their non-Lapis counterparts, and more likely than the average Royal Cemetery burial to contain multiple seals and copper vessels. The consistent factor in this pattern is the material used. The choice of seal stone does not appear to be an arbitrary decision. Rather, the strategic choice of using or owning a lapis lazuli cylinder seal, regardless of iconography, must hold some consistent meaning. Based on the data found, the first question raised was why an individual might need or use multiple cylinder seals. And the answer may lie in social identity, status, or rank of the individual. Near Eastern seals provide the richest material to understand how identities of the people from different social levels found expression in the material culture. We know that the loss of a seal had both legal and spiritual ramifications, so there's no doubting the meaningful relationship between a cylinder seal and its owner. Perhaps the lapis lazuli cylinder seal was not intended for rolling, but for wearing as adornment or as a symbol of social status or identity. Many cylinder seals in the Royal Cemetery were found in positions suggesting they were worn as a necklace, bracelet, or pinned to a cloak. Another theory may be that both seals were used, but for different purposes, since seal types can be broadly divided into 3 categories: personal, official or state, and votive or temple seals. The lapis lazuli seal could have served any of these purposes, including as a means of accessing the netherworld. Graves with lapis lazuli cylinder seals also show an increased correlation with copper vessels. Copper is not often discussed as an elite material, especially in comparison to gold, silver, and electrum. Copper is mentioned in ancient texts as a material that traveled long distances and was likely a part of elaborate trade relations. Maury in 1994 states copper was the most widely used of metals of all Mesopotamia. So it's interesting that those with cylinder seals of a rare material would have metal vessels of a common material. A deeper evaluation of this extends beyond the study's limitations, but several approaches would be insightful. So first, acquirement and use of copper throughout southern Mesopotamia would enhance the understanding of the material. And second, evaluating the use of specific bowl objects during events such as feasts or libation rituals could explain its presence in the elite burials. This study shows when studying cylinder seals, material must be properly considered. Lapis lazuli cylinder seals, regardless of iconography, have an increased correlation with individual burials, including multiple seals and copper vessels. While iconography of cylinder seals has been thoroughly researched, it would benefit the field to give equal research to finding meaning behind purposeful choice in material. Lapis lazuli is an obvious starting point to demonstrate this theory, as its divine significance is evidenced through text, art, and archaeological records. Further research could enhance our holistic understanding of cylinder seals and how their object history might connect with other more enigmatic objects or materials in the ancient Near East. I have all my references listed here that I'd be happy to share if anyone is curious. And thank you.
Thank you very much, Alison. There were a few questions from YouTube, and you can also take your time a little bit in answering them because one of our speakers wasn't able to make it, so we have a little bit extra time, which is so rare in conferences that you actually get to answer questions as fully as you would like. So the first question, this question was submitted really early in your talk, so I think it pertains to something at the beginning. How was the date of 6000 BC determined?
That was from a source. So let me just go back and see. So the evidence that did exist was that you would expect from civilization. So there were, basic burials, evidence of, fire pits, broken pottery, things like that. So roughly 6000 BC is when they see evidence of a more permanent civilization, and that is from Maury and Woolley in 1982.
Okay, and the next question, this seems like a big one to me. Is color a cultural construct? Is color a cultural construct or the value placed on colors? So is color or the value placed on colors a cultural construct?
So I do think that color and the associations that come up when we say that word are part of culture. And I like this question because I do think that the power of color is also a cultural construct, and what that can mean to a person is definitely dependent on the culture that they value and that they are from. So I think as a broad answer, yes. My investigation into color was definitely specified, very specific with lapis lazuli. So I can't speak to really the impact or influence of other colors and how that might hold power in any given civilization. But I do think that both color and the power of color are cultural concepts and are unique to each culture throughout antiquity, time and space, you know?
Okay, that was our YouTube questions. I have a question of my own, if you don't mind. Did you wear an ultramarine shirt because your talk is about lapis lazuli?
You know what? That was not a purposeful choice, but that's a fantastic coincidence, isn't it?
It is. It works very well. Well, thank you so much, Alison.